1. Most cowboys were poor laborers, not legends. Movies turned cowboys into heroic symbols of freedom. In reality, most cowboys were underpaid ranch workers doing exhausting labor. They spent long days herding cattle, fixing fences, branding livestock, and sleeping outdoors in terrible conditions. They weren't glamorous gunfighters. They were workers, often young, broke, and physically worn down by the job. 2. The Wild West smelled terrible. Hollywood gives us dusty streets and polished saloons, but it rarely shows the smell. Real frontier towns were packed with horse manure, animal blood, unwashed bodies, smoke, alcohol, and sewage. In many places there were no proper drainage systems, and waste sat in the streets. A western town may have looked exciting from a distance. Up close, it often smelled like disease. 3. Gunfights were rare, and usually messy movies made it seem like every disagreement ended in a dramatic duel in the middle of town. In reality, classic quick-draw gunfights were rare. Most shootings happened suddenly, at close range, often under the influence of alcohol, and without any dramatic warning. They were chaotic, ugly, and over in seconds, not elegant showdowns between two honorable men. 4. Saloons were more dangerous than romantic movies. Love saloons because they look exciting. Music, cards, whiskey, dancing girls. But real saloons were often filthy, violent, and full of desperate people. Gambling debts, drunken arguments, cheating accusations, prostitution, theft, and sudden violence made saloons some of the most dangerous places in town. They weren't just entertainment spots. They were pressure cookers. 5. Sheriffs weren't always the good guys. A badge didn't automatically make a man honorable. Some sheriffs and marshals were brave and respected. Others were corrupt, brutal, or closely tied to the same gamblers, saloon owners, and businessmen they were supposed to control. In some towns, lawmen protected whoever paid best. The line between law and criminality was often thinner than the movies admit. 6. Frontier medicine was basically survival roulette. A simple injury in the Wild West could become a death sentence. A horse kick, infected cut, bad tooth, or gunshot wound might kill you not because it was severe, but because there was no proper treatment. Doctors were scarce, supplies were limited, and sterilization was poor or non-existent. The frontier wasn't just dangerous because of violence. It was dangerous because even everyday injuries could spiral into disaster. 7. Many outlaws were dirty, hungry, and miserable. Movies love making outlaws look cool, rebellious men riding free across the frontier. But life on the run was usually miserable. Outlaws dealt with poor food, infected wounds, stolen horses, freezing nights, paranoia, and betrayal. They were constantly looking over their shoulder, sleeping badly, and wondering who might sell them out for a reward. The outlaw life wasn't freedom. It was stress with a gun. 8. Women in the West faced constant risk. The Wild West legend often treats women as saloon girls, school teachers, or background characters. Real women on the frontier faced relentless danger. Childbirth was deadly. Domestic abuse was often hidden. Work was physically exhausting. Isolation made everything worse. Women ran homes, raised children, managed businesses, and buried family members, all in a world that offered them very little protection. 9. Childbirth killed far too many women. One of the darkest truths about frontier life is how dangerous childbirth was. Without modern medicine, blood loss, infection, and complications could kill mothers and babies with terrifying speed. A quiet family photo from the Old West can hide multiple pregnancies, infant deaths, and years of grief. Movies rarely show this because it ruins the adventure fantasy. But it was one of the most common tragedies of frontier life. 10. Frontier justice. Often meant mob violence, Hollywood gives us stern judges and dramatic arrests. The truth was much rougher. In many towns, justice moved fast and ugly. Vigilante groups, lynchings, rushed hangings, and public punishment were all part of frontier life. If a town believed someone was guilty, due process could disappear instantly. Sometimes justice wasn't about truth at all. It was about fear, anger, and whoever controlled the crowd. 11. The West was built on displacement. Movies often show the frontier as empty land waiting to be settled. It wasn't empty. Westward expansion involved the forced removal of native communities, broken treaties, military violence, destroyed food systems, and cultural erasure. The Wild West legend usually centers settlers and cowboys, but much of that story was built on land taken from people who were already there. 12. Native Americans were turned into props. Even when Native people appeared in old Western stories or photographs, they were often presented in misleading ways. Some photographers staged Native subjects to fit Eastern fantasies of the vanishing Indian. Meanwhile, real communities were dealing with displacement, hunger, surveillance, and the destruction of their traditions. The image sold romance. The reality was trauma. 13. The buffalo slaughter was catastrophic. Buffalo weren't just animals on the frontier. They were central to the survival of many native communities. When buffalo herds were slaughtered on a massive scale, it wasn't just environmental destruction. It was economic and cultural devastation. Yet in popular Western mythology, buffalo hunters are often treated like rugged adventurers instead of participants in a disaster with enormous human consequences. 14. Gambling Destroyed Lives movies present poker tables as cool, smoky places where tough men test their nerves. Real gambling halls ruined people. A man could lose weeks of wages in one night. Arguments over cheating or debt could end in beatings or shootings. Gambling wasn't just a pastime. In many towns, it was one of the fastest ways to turn desperation into violence. 15. Prostitution was usually about survival, not glamour. Hollywood loves the image of the glamorous saloon woman with the witty one-liners and sparkling dress. But prostitution, in the West, was often driven by poverty, coercion, abuse, addiction, or lack of alternatives. Some women made money. Many others lived under brutal conditions and had little control over their lives. The glamorous version is easier to sell than the truth. 16. A lot of tough men were terrified. The Wild West myth depends on fearless men, but frontier life made people afraid all the time. Of robbery, disease, storms, debt, starvation, losing livestock, or waking up to violence outside the door. A hard expression in a portrait doesn't mean someone was fearless. It may simply mean they had learned not to show weakness in a world that punished it. 17. Frontier towns were full of scams. The West wasn't just about cattle drives and shootouts. It was also full of fraud. Land scams, fake mining claims, rigged gambling tables, crooked merchants, and inflated prices were common. In boomtowns especially, a lot of people got rich not by working hard but by taking advantage of people desperate for opportunity. The frontier sold dreams, and many of those dreams were traps. 18. Many towns were controlled by money, not law. In theory, Western towns had rules. In practice, local power often belonged to railroad companies, mine owners, cattle interests, land speculators, or saloon bosses. Whoever controlled the jobs, supplies, or political connections could shape the town's version of justice. That means the good guys versus bad guys story doesn't hold up very well. Often, the richest people wrote the rules. 19. Black cowboys were real and largely erased. One of the biggest lies in Western pop culture is who gets remembered. A significant number of real cowboys were black, Mexican, or native, yet the mainstream legend focused almost entirely on white men. Black cowboys drove cattle, worked ranches, rode trails, and lived the same dangerous life as everyone else. They weren't side notes. They were part of the real West. 20. Chinese laborers helped build the frontier. Chinese workers were essential to railroad construction and frontier labor, but Western mythology rarely gives them more than a passing glance. They worked under brutal conditions, faced intense racism, and were treated as disposable. The Wild West story most people know leaves them out because it's easier to tell a simple cowboy tale than admit how many different groups actually built the frontier. 21. Frontier families lived with constant loss. Movies love the image of the brave pioneer family heading west with hope in their eyes. What they don't show is how many families buried children, lost livestock, went hungry, or watched years of effort collapse because of drought, illness, or debt. Family life on the frontier wasn't just hard. It was emotionally devastating in ways the Western myth almost never acknowledges. 22. Even respectable towns had brutal poverty. A nice church, schoolhouse, or family portrait can make a frontier town look respectable, but many towns had severe poverty hiding behind that image. Families lived in shacks. Children worked early. and illness spread easily through overcrowded spaces. The Old West didn't just produce legends, it produced a lot of hungry people trying not to fall apart. 23. Frontier photography. Could lie one of the strangest truths about the Wild West is that even the photographs can be misleading. Props were added, subjects were posed carefully, clothing was chosen to create a certain image. Some portraits were less about documenting reality and more about selling a version of it. 24. Many men worked their whole lives and died with nothing. The frontier promised reinvention, land, money, freedom, a second chance. But plenty of men spent their lives working the West and ended up poor anyway. No ranch, no fortune, no glory, just worn-out bodies and a lifetime of hard labor. The myth says the West rewarded toughness. Reality says it often chewed people up and left them with nothing. 25. The Wild West was never really about freedom. That may be the biggest banned truth of all. The Wild West is remembered as a place of freedom, adventure, and self-made legends. But for many people, it was a place of control, violence, labor, grief, and constant instability. Women were trapped by survival. Native communities were pushed aside. Workers were exploited. Families lived one disaster away from collapse. Even the so-called heroes were often just men trying not to drown in the chaos. And maybe that's why the movies